In 1802, a Vermont court ruled that a woman named Dinah had never legally been a slave. Her owner walked free. The law they used to free him was the same law signed in his own town, the first constitution in North American history to abolish slavery. The man who bought her lived 2 blocks from where Vermont declared slavery illegal. The law he hid behind was written in his own town. To understand how a constitution that abolished slavery became the weapon used to protect the man who broke it, go back 6 years, Windsor, Vermont, 1783. A man named Stephen Jacob rides into Charlestown, New Hampshire. He is 30 years old, Yale educated, a practicing attorney in Windsor, already appointed state's attorney of Windsor County. He knows Vermont law. He enforces it professionally. He is about to buy a person. The seller is Jotham White, a man who will go on to serve in the Vermont legislature. The transaction is witnessed by a town leader. The price is £40. The bill of sale describes the subject as a Negro woman slave, approximately 30 years of age. Her name is Dinah. A sheriff's copy of that bill of sale survives. It is in the Vermont court record. The crime is not legend. It is documented, signed, and witnessed by men who knew exactly what they were doing. Jacob brings Dinah to Windsor. The anti-slavery constitution has been the law of his state for 6 years. He lives in the town where it was signed, and he does not care. The court record doesn't tell us what her days looked like. She left no letters, no diary, no testimony of her own. What we know is this: she worked in Jacob's household, likely cared for his children, received no compensation, and had no freedom. And this continued for approximately 17 years, while outside that house, Jacob rose. In 1791, President Washington's new federal government needed its first U.S. attorney for the District of Vermont. The man they chose was Stephen Jacob, a federal officer of the United States who simultaneously held an enslaved person in the first state in North America to ban slavery. He held both titles at once, and no one who appointed him appears to have found that disqualifying. He went on to serve on Vermont's Governor's Council, and then, in 1801, he was appointed Associate Justice of the Vermont Supreme Court. Every office, every title, every year of public honor. Dinah was still in his house. Around 1800, Dinah went blind. She was ill. She could no longer work. And Jacob, the attorney, the federal prosecutor, the Supreme Court justice, turned her out. She had given him 17 years. He gave her nothing. The town of Windsor was now responsible for a woman his household had discarded. When Windsor's selectmen went to Jacob and asked him to pay for her care, he refused. So Windsor took the matter to its voters. At the 1800 annual town meeting, between the election of a town clerk and other routine municipal business, the people of Windsor debated what the record calls what measures the town will take respecting a certain Negro woman by the name of Dinah, purchased and brought into this state about 17 years past by Stephen Jacob, Esquire. They voted to sue him, not out of outrage, not to vindicate Dinah, to protect the town treasury. Windsor's government was not Dinah's champion. Windsor sued because it wanted its money back. The case came before the Windsor County Court. Jacob's lawyers maneuvered a procedural dismissal. Windsor appealed. The case went to the Vermont Supreme Court, Jacob's own court. Stop, because here is what the history books leave out. Jacob was a sitting Vermont Supreme Court justice when this case arrived at his bench. He presided over the initial proceedings in his own case before recusing himself. And the 2 justices who remained to decide it were not random frontier magistrates. One of them was the most celebrated literary figure in New England law, a man whose name you almost certainly know from somewhere other than a courtroom. His name was Royal Tyler. Harvard educated, the author of The Contrast, the first comedy ever performed on the American stage. George Washington attended a performance. Tyler was not some provincial backwater judge. He was the finest legal mind in the region, a friend of the founding generation, a man of culture, letters, and unimpeachable reputation. And in 1802, Royal Tyler sat down and wrote the ruling that made sure Dinah would never collect a penny. This was not a confused court fumbling toward an unjust outcome. This was the establishment's most distinguished member, deploying the founding document of his own state with surgical precision on behalf of a man of his own class.
Here is what he wrote.
No inhabitant of this state can hold a slave. Therefore, the bill of sale transferring Dinah as a slave, even if valid under New Hampshire law, ceases to operate in Vermont. It has no legal force here, which means, because Vermont bans slavery, the document proving Jacob owned Dinah is inadmissible. Because it is inadmissible, Jacob's legal obligation cannot be established. Because his obligation cannot be established, he owes her nothing. The law of freedom became the trap. The anti-slavery Constitution. The document Windsor is celebrated for, the founding achievement of Vermont's moral identity, was the precise instrument used to erase the one woman it was supposed to protect. Tyler did not fail to understand this. He constructed it. The system did not fail Dinah. The system performed exactly as the men who built it intended. After the ruling, Dinah stayed in Windsor. The town records from those years call her Jacob's Wench. They call her African Dinah. Selectmen issued orders for her to leave town. A deacon's son assaulted her. The town paid her upkeep, grudgingly, for the rest of her life. In the birthplace of Vermont freedom, in poverty, in a town that could not decide whether she was a burden or an embarrassment or both. On March 6, 1809, Spooner's Vermont Journal published a death notice. In this town, Dinah, a woman of color. 6 words. For 30 years in Windsor, for 17 years in Jacob's house, for the case that went all the way to the Vermont Supreme Court and came back with nothing. Her grave is unknown. Stephen Jacob died in 1817. He is buried in the Old South Church Cemetery in Windsor. His name is preserved in stone and on a street sign, Jacob Street, Windsor, Vermont, 1 block from the Connecticut River, in the town where he purchased a human being 6 years after his state declared that illegal. The old Constitution House still stands on Main Street. Vermont's anti-slavery founding is still taught in schools, still cited in speeches, still celebrated as a clean chapter in American history. In 2022, a Vermont state historic marker for Dinah was installed, 200 yards from that building. That same year, Vermont voters approved a constitutional amendment by 88.7% to fully prohibit slavery and indentured servitude in any form, closing loopholes in the 1777 text that had never been removed. Vermont needed 245 years to finish what it started in that tavern. The marker and the old Constitution House are 200 yards apart. Anyone can stand between them today. Jacob's name is still on the street. The grave is still missing. Windsor is the birthplace of Vermont. That part is true. The rest of the story is in the court record. There are other names in Vermont's court records that never made it to a marker. We'll be back in New England.